I'm going to be taking you through an early endgame Meteor build that you can start off with after you reach level 50. This build doesn't require any unique items, and most of the aspects used can be found in the codex, meaning it's a very accessible build for going into World Tier 3 and World Tier 4. The first skill I'm using is Frost Nova. You can use this on large groups of enemies or elites to freeze them and make them vulnerable prior to wiping them out with Meteor. This also helps with damage and some crowd control. The next skill I have is the defensive skill Flame Shield, which will grant you a movement buff while active and do a decent amount of healing for 50% of your missing health. By activating the cooldown, you're also going to trigger protection to give yourself a barrier, which will help with the damage buffs from your aspects that require a barrier to be effective. I've also picked up Ice Armor and Teleport for my other two defensive skills. Now, Ice Armor is used to help with keeping a barrier up and also with mana regeneration, which is required a lot to ensure you can keep using Meteor, and having Teleport will help you with your overall movement and an extra bit of damage mitigation. The last two skills on my bar are what you're going to be using to deliver all of your damage. The first skill being Meteor, which is your main damage skill, and is what you're going to be continually using to obliterate your enemies. Now, the reason for having Inferno as your ultimate skill is for two reasons. One, to be able to group up enemies to make them easy to hit with Meteor, and during this early endgame phase it's also key because while it's active you don't use any mana for your pyromancy skills, which means while Inferno is active, Meteor is not going to be costing you any mana, so you can just keep hurling them down while that's active. In terms of the overall gameplay and bringing the skills together, you need to use Teleport to help with your movement speed throughout the dungeon, and for some of the enemies you can just keep moving and dropping Meteor on them to take them out. When there are some elites or larger groups of enemies, you can use Frost Nova to freeze them and make them vulnerable prior to hurling down meteors at them for the final blow. If you're low on mana, you can cast Inferno so you can keep sending down meteors. In terms of the defensive skills, you can use Ice Armor whenever you're taking some damage or require a boost to your mana regeneration, and use Flame Shield either when you want a movement buff or some healing without having to use a potion. Going into the enchantments, for the enchantments I've taken Fireball and Teleport. This is to help with some extra movement with Teleport, as it does convert your dodge to a type of teleport you can use, and for the extra AoE damage provided by Fireball. You can look at putting Meteor in at some point, but this is usually better towards later endgame when you'll have some better spec gear. In terms of aspects, 7 out of 9 of them are available from the codex, with only 2 requiring to be found from drops, which is the aspects of concentration and the aspect of conceited, both of which, if you look out for them, you should easily have by level 50. In terms of the pet for season 3, there are a fair few options you can go with, but for this build I've been using Focus Fire with Swift, Burning and Arcing. This setup is great for firing rays of fire at enemies, with Swift increasing its attack speed, Burning, which applies some of the damage as burning, which works well with your passes, and finally with Arcing, which allows for the skill to hit a lot more enemies at once. And then for the supporting skill, I'm using Flash of Adrenaline for a damage buff, Initiative Support, which will help your pet teleport to you, which helps you give you the support and it'll be closer by, Safeguard for damage mitigation, and Fortify for an extra defensive buff. Now, if you do want some further information regarding this build, I do have a link down in the description, so feel free to have a look in a bit further detail.